saw Austin last week.
Yeah, you see.
Had no idea where he was working, but I saw him just inadvertently. Yes, Brother Larry.
Keith Grammer, you remember?
Just wait.
Yes,
Yeah, severe motorcycle wreck last week.
I'm so sorry.
Lifespan of him to the hospital. I haven't heard the latest, but he's in real critical condition.
He helped build this pulpit. When we got ready to open our church for the first time 5 years ago, Brother Larry donated the materials and the labor to build this pulpit. And Heath, the young man that had the motorcycle accident and he's critical, helped build this. And what was funny about that was Heath, and I think it was Rick that was here also, there was 2 or 3 guys who were here. These pews came out of the district courthouse in Shelbyville, where people have sat on them and been called forth before the judge and convicted or sent to jail. And Heath and Rick both said to me that day, they came for our opening service, and they said, you know what, this is not the first time we've been on these pews. Amen. He's a wonderful man. Please pray for him. The most important thing is that we know the Lord. Amen.
Can you pray for somebody if you don't know their name?
Yes, we can.
I have a cousin, his father-in-law got bladder cancer. Not very well at all. He sent his name, it's on my phone out in the car, and I don't remember.
So Brother Tim is asking us to pray for someone who has cancer. We don't know the name. But when you pray, there have to be a host of people like that come to your mind. You may not know their name. You may have met them. You may have heard about them. Stay on your knees long enough so that God can talk to you about somebody's need. How about that? Don't just jump down there and jump back up. When you talk to God, give Him a chance to talk to you. I will say this about prayer before I minister today. I find when I'm praying, and I pray best when I'm here. So I come here, we have a key, you can come in and pray anytime. But I find that when I pray, that God has a way of overriding. He will feed me. While I'm praying, He will feed me. It's like a torrent of water pushing against my little stream, and He will shove it backwards, and He'll feed me something that I need to pray about. And if you'll stay on your knees long enough, and if you'll pray fervently enough, you'll find God talking to you and not just you talking to Him. Is that a good sermon?
Yes.
Okay. Practice that. The writer John is the writer that Jesus said, John, whom I love. Jesus must have been very close to John. Peter, James, and John seemed to be the 3 apostles that Jesus favored the most and was the closest to. You remember in the garden, He pulled them apart and took them when He went a little farther to pray. He wanted those 3 guys with Him. Not everybody, okay, are your favorite person. You interact with lots of people that are not close in your life. But Jesus must have felt a closeness to those 3 boys, and this is one of them, John. And he writes these words as Jesus dictates them. Are you ready? 34. And see, Micah, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I have it on.
Okay, we'll change it for you right now.
Okay.
Oh, you got it?
Good.
Yeah, you got it.
As I read this, I'm going to ask you this question. And then I want you to think. If you could go back in time and change one thing, what would it be? Now that's a question God put on my heart this week. I never heard that from anybody. But if you could go back in time and change one thing, what would it be? I pulled Kennedy aside last night while I was studying. I said, come in the room in here. And she came in and I asked her this question. I said, now think about it for a moment and tell me what you would change. She thought. She had a really good answer. She said, I would have Eve not take the fruit from the tree. That's a good one. And then I shot it down. I said, but the problem with that is, God knew if Eve didn't do it, you would. Because because he called the end from the beginning. And in the beginning, he provided a sacrifice for my sin because he knew we would. He knew it. And so in the very, before the foundation of the world was laid, he provided a sacrifice for our sin. So if Eve had to, so I said, that one won't work, so somebody else is going to come along and do it. So she thought again. And I provided suggestions. Would you have made Hitler not be born, who cost millions and millions of lives and untold misery? Would you have stopped World War II? Would you have changed World War I? Would you have not had the Duke shot? Would you have not had Martin Luther King assassinated? John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy? Would you have altered history by changing what event? What one thing would you change? Now just hang on to that as we move forward here, and I will read to you from John chapter 13, 2 verses 34 and 35. Here's what Jesus dictates to John. Jesus looks at his disciples and says this, I'm giving you commandment number, which one? 11. My wife got it. I'm giving you commandment number 11. How many were in the original? The finger of God wrote in stone. 10. And now Jesus, this is the only time he said this. I got a new one. A new commandment for you. And here's what it is. A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. As I have loved you, that you love one another. He really fixed us when he threw that little clause in there, didn't he? You thought he was going to leave it up to you and me to decide what love was and how it was exemplified. Oh, he knew better. So he said, I'm giving you commandment number 11. I want you to love one another like I have loved you. Love one another. And then he moves to the next verse and he says, and by this, will all men know that you're my disciples. If you love one another like I have loved you. That's how the world is going to know that we love each other. I'm moving up technologically. I feel like the weatherman. We got a front moving in here, our low front moving up from down in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's going to come up. Okay, forget it. Love one another. Well, okay, I'm going to do that eventually. Love one another now. Say now.
Now.
Our world.
A little late.
He did it, but he did it better than anyone else. Because he's my grandson. Love one another. I've given you the 11th commandment. I want you to love each other. I want you to love another one. Love each other like I love you. Do it now. And that's how the world of watching people will know that you're my disciple. I have a delicate subject today. So you have to be careful today on my message when you say amen, or you might get caught. This is the only way. This is the only way that the world's going to know that you follow Jesus. He said that's the way. What is the way? Help me?
Love one another.
If you love one another like he has loved us. Now, what we say won't mean a thing if we don't genuinely love one another. Because it's easy to say, love you, love you, out the door, love you. Really, made a really bad decision. He was young. He was the younger one. Anybody in their youth ever make a bad decision? I'd like to see a hand. All right. I made a bunch in my youth, and frankly have made some in my older years also, since I turned 50. Some bad decisions. And he made one, and by the way, some of them can be very costly. And then there was the model son, the one that said, I've not done anything wrong. Well, not on the outside, but inside of you, you're really pious. On the outside, you look the part, and you even act the part. But let me tell you what Jesus sees. He sees deep inside. He knows who you really are, even if you say, love you. Then in Matthew 5, Jesus said, now, unless your love, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you can't go to heaven. What? I can't go to heaven unless my righteousness exceeds that? That's right, because the Pharisees on the outside looked the part, acted the part, but on the inside, Jesus said, what he said was, you're a lovely tombstone. I've always enjoyed going to cemeteries and looking at old tombstones. And I oftentimes stand there and look at a date and I think, wow, 1792. One might have lived to be 90 years old, and next to them, a family member that died at age 2, or an infant. And you always imagine, well, there wasn't any antibiotics. And I wonder, was this whooping cough, some disease that came along for which there was no vaccination and no medicine? And I wonder how that one died. You know, people died, I would see people who died the year that Lincoln was assassinated in 1863, and I would wonder if they heard the news before they died that their president had been shot. I just wonder those things. And then I've been in cemeteries where people had tombstones that were like huge and beautiful and ornate. And Jesus said, you are like a beautiful tombstone outside. You know what's in the grave? A ghoulish, decomposed, skeletal, not a pretty sight. And Jesus said, you who act the part and will look the part, but are not the part, you're a beautiful tombstone, but you're dead and decomposed inside, full of dead men's bones. The world doesn't want to follow that because they can tell what's disingenuous. In time, they'll know if you love them. Outside, that boy in Luke 15 was a model son, but inside, he was pious and he didn't have the right spirit. So Jesus raises the bar. Let me tell you something about all of us. It was his flawless obedience to God that counts for me and counts for you and makes it appear as though you are special. You say, I'm not like them. No, but you're rotten to the core and lost as a duck. You know all ducks are lost. I'm pretty sure there's a verse over in Generations or Revolutions that tells that. The book of Jerusalem. You're lost. So what is lost? Are you sort of lost? You know, a little bit lost? Kind of saved? Saved and generally saved? Either saved or lost. And if it were not for this sinless sacrifice, you and I are lost. So there's no room in my life and no room in your life for us to not love and not forgive anybody because our only hope was by grace through faith. Through him, Jesus said, and that not of yourselves, by grace, say grace,
Grace.
by grace through faith. That's how we're saved, not of ourselves. We're just pretty tombstones on the outside. God help us not to be full of putrefying pious on the inside. I'm giving you commandment number 11, Jesus said, a new one. Love one another like I've loved you. And that's how everybody's going to know that you're one of my followers. Love one another and do it now. Our world is in a crisis. I'm ministering this message. We're broadcasting right now, by the way. We're live streaming, so people are listening at home or wherever they have a computer. I don't know what they listen to. Somebody sent me a picture. I was on TV, but I'm not on TV. I don't know how they did that, but I'm on TV somewhere. Love one another now. Our world is in a crisis. Tens of millions of people are upset. We are in the midst of a pandemic that is taking millions of lives. We're in the midst of unrest that is affecting just about everybody's life. If you're going to do something for Jesus Christ, go ahead and do it. If you're going to love people, don't put it off. Don't wait. Do it now. By the way, I love to go to auctions. My wife and I both like to go to auctions. Anybody else like to go to an auction? When you go, do you ever buy anything that you don't need? Then you go home and you make room to put it. You scoot something over you got the last time that you thought you'd use, and you put it in there, and you can't even park your car in your garage because you've gone to auctions. And you bought stuff you don't need and you won't ever use, and you say, but I'm going to use that someday. I wish you could see my barns. You know the rich man in the Bible that said his barns were full? That was me. My barns are full. I don't know what he had in his. Mine are full of junk. And I keep putting more stuff in there. And I'm not the only one in my family that does it. My brother Danny, who isn't here today to defend himself, it's a great time to talk about it. He is a collector. His wife is here. He is a collector of junk also. My Aunt Twill suggested that she'll be watching this broadcast. She said, you all like this. My Aunt Twill said, Mikey, which is what she calls me reverently, Mikey Blaine, she says, why don't you get Danny and Connie to go on a vacation, and while they're gone, you know where I'm going, while they're gone, gather up all of this junk and sell it? I said, Philip, because he doesn't know it's junk. It's just taking over at my house, that's right. He thinks it's a treasure.
He thinks somebody will eventually...
He thinks somebody will eventually use it or need it, and that's what I think.
One of the kids will need it.
Yeah.
Go to work on something that's worth it. Well, I need it today.
Chad, you're exactly right. And you were, why did I throw that away?
I did.
And he didn't. Chad didn't. He's got it stored somewhere. I like an auction. But this one, how about if I told you that there was an auction called Cheapside? That would interest you, wouldn't it? Because you'd be thinking, hey, I get a real bargain. I go to these auctions. I know where they all are. I got a text from someone this week. Linda Popiak sent me a text, and she said, Pastor, they're having an auction. She told me where it was, and she said, they've got this car for sale, and they only want $1,950 for it. I sent her a text back, and I said, all I need is $1,950, and I could go get that. I could get it cheap. Cheapside auction. And that's okay until you put this word on the end of it. Cheapside auction block. It's in Lexington, Kentucky. It's on the southwest corner of the Fayette County Courthouse. And it's for thousands black men and women and children were auctioned off. And on the northeast corner was the whipping post. And the whipping post was a big post that they would tie the Africans to, because they weren't African Americans as we refer to them, they were Africans. In 1619, 401 years ago, we went to Africa with a boat, and we brought back 20 Africans who didn't want to come. We chased them through the woods and the jungles. We drugged them away from their wives and their children. And we put them on a boat. We brought them to Jamestown Colony. That was 401 years ago. By 1790, there were 760,000 Africans in this United States of America. Many of them had been born here, but they were not citizens. On the northeast corner, their hands would be tied to the post. Have you ever seen the picture of one with the whelps all over their back? All they had to do is say one thing wrong. Do one little thing wrong. And we would beat them. In Lexington, Kentucky, on the northeast corner of the Cheapside auction block. He went, Abraham Lincoln. He was dating Mary Todd. She lived in Lexington. Her family owned people, slaves. Lincoln went to visit her. He was there for 5 days. Her father had a man who owed him a debt and couldn't pay it, and so the man sold slaves that day on the southwest corner on the auction block to pay Mary Todd's father his debt. Lincoln watched it and wondered at it. He watched a man be sold. Catch it. There is unrest in this nation and around this globe, and I'm going to give you part of the reason why, and I'm going to ask you to go love one another. Don't say amen. I don't have to have it now. I'm anointed. He watched it and he knew there was something strange about it, something wrong. And so he watched a man be drugged away from his wife, her crying and screaming, and then he watched their 3 children be sent off to different slave owners, her to one, him to another, and they to others. Little children crying, the wife crying, the husband crying. They weren't citizens, no. They weren't then and they weren't going to be. This girl, Eliza, was a mixed race because her master had sired her, fathered her through one of his other slaves, so she was mixed. She was going to bring a really good price. So they bared her breast and exposed her thighs so that they could get a good price for her. The high bids were a Frenchman and a pastor named Reverend Calvin Fairbanks. You say, you mean a reverend was bidding on her? Yes, but for a reason. He paid $1,000. He was the high bidder. $1,485. Your mother, your sister, He bought her to set her free. He came that day to the auction block, Cheapside, to buy her so he could set her free. Have you ever heard of this book? Anybody ever heard of this book? The Preservation of the Favored Races. Now, I'm talking about this today because this is the elephant in the nation, in the room, around the world. This has got to be talked about. This can't be overlooked. This book was written and published 2 months before Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. This book was published in November of 1859. I'm sorry, before Lincoln was elected president. 1859 of November, Lincoln became president. It was inaugurated in January, 2 months later. He'd already won the election. This book, The Preservation of the Favored Races. It'd be you, I suppose. Me. Who was the author? Anybody know the author? Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, but we didn't call it The Preservation of the Favored Races. That was too obnoxious, so we just named it The Origin of Species. And then we taught it in every classroom, and in every college, and university, and institution. So not only us, but our progeny would know that we are the favored. That the fittest and the strongest and the best and the cream rises to the top, and that would be us. I don't think we were born stupid. I don't think we were created stupid. And I don't think we were created stooped over, dragging our hands on the ground, dragging our nose. Do you hear what I'm saying? And I don't care how many skeletal remains they find that makes our skull look shaped different or our back stooped over, that wasn't us. God created us in His image, and He didn't create us stupid and stooped.
Amen.
Say amen. That one you can say amen to. And Darwin comes along and writes a book, The Preservation of the Favored Race, calls it The Origin of Species, and then adds that title. And we teach it in every classroom. The first publishing sold out of it in 2 weeks. They did a new printing in 30 days. All of that was sold out. And in 6 months, they were printing millions of copies. And now it is all over the world. And it is taught in universities. And it tries to tell us that we're not. I wonder why we don't do what Drew Brees said, and that every child in school should have a Bible. I wonder why we can teach Charles Darwin's Origin of Species and the evolution of the favored race. I wonder why we can teach his book, but we can't teach this one. No wonder our nation and our world is messed up, because we've declared this Bible taboo. His book is generational and marvelous. God's Word, God's book, this book is God's book. Other men's books are their books. This book is God's book. We won't teach. Well, I'll tell you, if you want to know about God's book, you can go to church and they'll tell you about God's book, but not in school. We won't tell our children about it. You know what else I wonder, let's go back to that. I wonder why it is that with the problems we have in our nation and in our society. You see, I had wonderful parents and grandparents that taught me right from wrong. And not everybody had that. Most of you may have had that. Some of you may not have. But I had that, and I'm blessed. But not everybody had it. And you're going to be loving people who weren't blessed like you were blessed. I wonder why we couldn't, in the school system, don't you suppose we could show some films of people with needles in their arms passing out and show it to children and say, this is what happens when you get on drugs? Don't you think we could show broken homes and battered wives and say, this is what happens to your family when you have an alcoholic that beats you up and won't work their job and won't provide for this is what alcohol does, this is what drugs do? But no, we can't teach that. But we can teach Darwin. Now, I'm mad about that. And of course, we can say it in here. They don't care if we say it in here. They just don't want us to come out there and say it. So if you could go back in time and you could change one thing, what would you change? But you can't. You can't go backwards. If you could go back, maybe you'd say, I never take that first drink. Maybe you'd say, I never take that first puff. Maybe you would say, I would never take that first hit, that first needle. Maybe, I don't know what's affected your life, but you can't. Life only goes forward. Which direction does the sand go in the hourglass? Just one way. Life only goes forward. So what are you going to do with the present? That's what I want to know. What are you going to do with the present time? And by the way, you may have no future. What do you mean by that, Pastor? I mean, one day you're here and the next day somebody, did you hear? They're gone. Mr. Shaw was going fishing. He was on Interstate 65 with Chris and Robbie, and they were going fishing down in the Tennessee River. One day you're fishing, the next day you're not here. You may have no future. And by the way, some of us have lived a long time. I wish I were as young as some of you, but I'm not. And I can't back up the clock and be as young as you are. You know Miss Ida is now old enough to draw Social Security. She had a birthday while we were gone. Everybody say, happy birthday, Miss Ida. How old were you? 87. And drove to the house of God this morning. But, so you may not have a future. So when am I going to love people? Love them now. Now. 11th commandment, the new commandment I'm giving you, that you love one another like I've loved you. And that there are people who are depressed out there today because they see no way out. I will forever remember Greg and Diane because one day in my office when I was pastoring in Ohio, Greg comes into my office and he's just trembling and shaking and he's crying. Just a young man, wife and 3 children. He's shaking and he's crying. Pastor, Diane called me from the house and said for me to come home. She was going to kill all the children. And she did. She filled up the bathtub with scalding hot water and took her 3 girls and drowned them all. She chased the oldest one, 7 years old, throughout the house before she caught him. You could tell the struggle. And then she split her wrists and bled her death and called him just before she died. And I've always asked myself, Robbie, did I miss something there? Did I miss something? When she was sitting on the pew there with the children, do you know that people can get depressed enough? You may not know what's going on in their life. Love one another and make sure they know it. Love you, not that one. I'm talking about the genuine thing. Love unfeigned is what the Bible called it. I listened to the radio yesterday and a young man is on the radio on a 911 call. They were playing his 911 call. He was a young black man. You know where he'd been? It was nighttime. He's the drummer. He was the drummer of his church. He'd been to church playing the drums. He was on his way home from a night service, and his car broke down on the road, and he was frightened because a black man broke down on the side of the road at night. It's not the same as a white man broke down on the side of the road at night. And so he didn't have other people he could call. He called 911. And he said, I'm on the road, I'm on the side of the road, my car's broke down, and I'm frightened. And the 911 call was recorded, and I was listening to it on the radio. This happened just about 3 years ago. And a car pulled up behind him, and it was a plainclothes policeman. But he didn't know it was a plainclothes policeman. He just knew it was an individual. And they came up and said, is there a problem? And he said, my car broke down, and I got somebody on the phone. He said, and they said, well, what's the problem? Well, let me, and they began to question him, and he got frightened. And he took off running. And he's on the phone. And 5 bullets go into his back while he's running. And he's shot and killed. That wouldn't have happened to our drummer. Y'all listening to me? I'm talking about what we've got to do. We went over and got them 401 years ago, and we brought them back over here by the thousands, and we told them they couldn't vote. They couldn't read. Do you know some of the whelps on their back are because they got caught with a book in their hand? You're not allowed to read. You're not allowed to learn how to write. You can't sign a contract. You can't serve on a jury. You can't be a policeman. And then we decided we'd pass the 13th Amendment and really do them a favor, and we tell them they were free. And we gave them 40 acres and a mule, and a few months later, we took it back. Lincoln was assassinated, and Andrew Johnson was the worst Southern racist that there ever was. I'm a student of history. It was my first major, okay? I know what I'm talking about. So we give them 40 acres and a mule, and then we let them build their little shanty in their house. They said, William Tecumseh Sherman from Ohio said, what do you need to be free? They said, we need land so we can feed our family. Then we give you 40 acres, and the Army's got all these mules, pack mules we had during the Civil War. You know the worst war in the world is a civil war. Civil, say civil. It's the war from within. That's the worst. You know the worst church war is the one that takes place inside the church. When you got people over there who won't talk to people over there, that's the worst battle in the world. Nobody wants to go to that church. You got people, you have a business meeting and somebody stands up over here and gives their thoughts, and then you got somebody sits over and argues with them, and the next thing you know, you've got, I ain't fooling with them and I ain't talking to them, and it's called a civil war. It's called a civil disturbance. The civil war that takes place inside of our country, within the borders of America. When brothers are against brothers and fathers are against sons, civil war. And it is not Christian. It is not supposed to be. If you're going to love somebody, you better love them now, say now. White Americans think that freedom is something they have and somebody's trying to take it away from them. Latinos, Asians, and African Americans think freedom is something that they aspire to achieve, and that somebody's trying to keep them from getting it. Yeah, we'll let you be free. We'll pass the 13th Amendment and let you be free. And then we'll pass the 14th and we'll segregate you. So you can go to church, but you can't go to our church. And you can go to the restaurant, but you can't go to our restaurant. And you can go to school now, finally. But you can't go to our school. And good luck on raising enough money to buy some books. And by the way, you all better act right too. You better have a good attitude every time we see you. My wife and I went to visit the old evangelist, but you wouldn't think him old. He was with us about a year ago, Kenneth Dyson. Remember, he preached like the house was on fire. He jumped up on that front pew right there. We had one family in the church, and that's enough for me. I've never seen him since. They've been coming for months, and I've never seen him since. And on that day, that family, I can tell you where they used to sit, and this was what was funny. God must have just been weeding the place out. But that day, instead of sitting where they used to sit, they sat on the second row right there. And Kenneth is preaching and he's shouting and he's up here dancing and he's excited. Look, someone said, don't criticize my praise till you know what he saved me from.
Amen.
Hallelujah. Don't criticize me when I get happy and start dancing because you don't know the hell he saved me from. And whenever I think about where I could have been, instead of where I am, it makes me want to say, thank you, Jesus.
Thank you, Jesus.
So Kenneth he's shouting and he's dancing, he's preaching, his face is red, and he runs down here. Brother Larry, you've seen it 1,000 times from me. Brother Larry found the Lord in his revival, and so did I, and so did Danny, and so did my cousin Larry, and so many, Bobby, so many of them. And he ran down and jumped up on that pew standing right back where you are, Jasmine. And I haven't seen that family since. Obviously, they probably found peace somewhere, but it apparently wasn't going to be here. Yeah, we went to see him because he has cancer. He's been battling that, difficulty walking. He's 85 years old now, 85 or 6, but he's still ready to preach. He wants to come up here and see us in the fall of the year and preach for us again. You all make sure you love him. And so we had dinner, and after we had dinner, the place where we ate was next to a mall. Well, now with the COVID thing that's going on, the mall parking lot was nearly empty. It was just hardly no cars at all. Dorian and I decided we would go over to the mall. Well, we got to the parking lot, and Dorian said, you know, I really don't care to go to the mall. We're in Memphis. We really wanted to see Elvis. So we thought he might be at the mall, because we know he's still alive. But so we pulled into a parking spot, and it was just 8 or 10 cars, maybe in the whole mall area. We pulled up beside one, and we're getting ready to turn the motor off and get out. She said, I don't think I want to go. Whatever I need, she said, I'll probably get it at Walmart. Okay. So I put it in reverse and I backed out. As I backed out of my parking spot, it turned and started to go. The car that was parked right next to me, my eye caught a young African-American couple sitting in the car. And I noted that the car seemed to be tilted. And I said, I think they've got a flat tire. And I rolled up and I looked out and I could see the tire was flat. And he was on his phone and she was just sitting there. And the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, back up, repark. And rolled down the window. Actually, I got out. I said, did you know it's flat? He said, yeah. He said, I'm on the phone with my grandma. And he said, I don't know. He said, I'm reading the manual. Now it's getting close to evening time. It'll soon be dark. And here will be a young black couple on a parking lot with I back my car up, I pull it in, I tell the young lady, go sit with my wife in there in the air conditioning, we'll fix this tire. He said, I think there's another one in the back end. Yep, they put him back there for a reason. So I go, he gets it out, we roll it up there, and it's got enough air in it. It's not fully inflated, but it's got enough. And he said, I don't know where to put the jack in. And it was a strange looking jack. And it turns out there's a hole on the side of the car. You pop something open, and there's a hole there, and you slide the jack in there, and then you crank it up. And he was reading the manual, trying to figure out where to put the jack. And he said, I got my grandma on the line, and she don't want me to hang up. What do you think his grandma was worried about? The thing every other black grandmother is worried about their black grandson. Will he be sitting there when the sun goes down? He said, my father doesn't live around here. I think that was his way of saying, dad's gone. Where? Maybe he's in prison. Maybe he just left. Maybe he didn't finish his education. Well, my dad doesn't live around here. Well, we'll fix it. We slide the jack in, we crank it up, we loosen the lug nuts. We put the other tire on. We jack it back down. We take the jack out, we put the flat tire in the trunk. Now, when I went on vacation, Robbie, I did like you and Katie Sue did. I put some cash in my pocket. I took two $100 bills and I had them right in here. And, you know, the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me and said, give him one of those. I never told him what it was. So we got done and he comes around, he still got the phone. And he comes around and he grabs me and gives me a big hug. And his girlfriend had been sitting over there. He said, we're getting ready to get married. And she graduates in, is it 2 more days? 2 more days. One of the largest high schools in the state, somewhere around 700 seniors were going to graduate, but I don't know if they're going to have a graduation even. They were going to be able to have one. And this is Tennessee, and they were going to allow it. And they've been in there, they hadn't gotten one, but they've been in there looking at a graduation dress. And so the Lord said, you give him one of those. And so he comes around the car, and he gives me a big hug. He's got Grandma on the phone, and he's trying to tell me how much he appreciates it. He's trying to say, man, oh man, I can't tell you what this means. And I said, well, it's okay. And he said, Grandma, you got it? And he said, Grandma wants to talk to you. Grandma wants to talk to you. He thrust the phone out my direction. Grandma said, oh, honey, thank you so much. Thank you so much for helping. Thank you so much for helping my grandson. It's okay, Grandma. I'm glad I can do it. Give it back to him. I reached in my pocket. I get one of those $100 bills. Should give him both, but I got one of them out. I slipped it in his hand. I said, go fix that tire and get that girl a dress for graduation. I was thinking, there came the fountain. Don't wait to love somebody. You love them now. I'm going to give you the 11th commandment then as I wrote with my finger and stoned it. This is what I'm going to tell you before I go here to prove to you how much I love you. I'm going to say it to you. John, write it down. Love one another like I love you. Who's the custodian of freedom? If you don't do it, they're never going to know that you're a follower of Jesus. Let's pray. Savior of the world, you said you were not willing that any should perish. Any included me. Any included the boy on the parking lot in Memphis. Any includes every marcher, every policeman, every mother, every father, every grandparent, every child. Any included all of us. And you demonstrated it, you showed it by giving of yourself completely, without reservation. And then you said, for me to do it, so the world would know that I'm following you. Somewhere seated in our midst, today, tomorrow, next year, if you should tarry, there might be a Diane who's so discouraged, so depressed. Lead us to them. Show them to us, and let us not be so caught up and so busy in our own little world that we forget the one you died for. Put them in our path with a flat tire, or a broken heart, or a broken spirit. And let us not defer. Any good that we are going to do, may we do it now. May we not put it off. For we shall not pass this way again. In Jesus' name. Amen. Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to Him belong, they are weak, but He is strong. Say it. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. The Bible tells me so. Look, I haven't preached to you in 3 months. You deserve to sit there an hour while you know. Amen? And you gotta love me. If you're going to go to heaven, you gotta love me. So love one another and then go home, okay?
Have a great week, y'all. We got 4 days.
Goodbye, Charity.
Yeah, my 8 plants all got different Work's coming along.
Thank you.